The Holy Gospel can be found on page 796 of your pew Bibles if you would like to follow along. The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 14th chapter, verses 13 through 21. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured the sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away, so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled. And they took what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. This is the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. And at this point, I would like to call forward and welcome. Please join me in welcoming Karen Anderson.
And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? Micah 6:8. Buenos días. Buenos días. Thank you. It's great to be here in Owatonna and at Trinity. I feel so lucky to have grown up in this wonderful community and to have my life and faith shaped by this amazing congregation. I remember when I was in 5th grade at McKinley School, and my dad was sitting at the end of my bed one night, and we were talking about what I wanted to be when I grew up. We were talking about vocations in school. And I remember him saying, "You have to find something that you love to do every day and get up happily to go to work." And thanks to all of you and the global mission of the ELCA, I have that job. 36 years ago when I was 25, and you don't have to bother to do the math, after working for a year with Chilean refugees in New York City at a Lutheran ministry, I felt called to move to Chile. A year later, under the brutal military dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, with 2 Chilean health workers and a Canadian physician, we founded EPES, Educación Popular en Salud, the primary healthcare education program of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Chile. Our goal was to improve health conditions in poor communities through the organized participation of the people themselves. At the core of our strategy is a program to train community health workers. We train 15 to 20 women about local illnesses and leadership skills. We had learned from groundbreaking work in other parts of the world how important it could be for local people to understand how to treat common illnesses like respiratory infections and diarrhea, and what a positive effect this could have in their communities. But more importantly for us was training groups of women that could work over the long term, over many years, to address the underlying issues that affect poor communities' health. When we started EPES, working in poor communities was considered subversive by the military dictatorship. Oftentimes, our office was watched by men sitting in black taxis with polarized windows and dark glasses and those huge antennas. The communities we worked in were often surrounded by the military, and house-by-house searches often ended in confiscation of our health materials. Lutheran church leaders were arrested, and some were kicked out of the country. The idea that local women could gain skills, knowledge, and the capacity to organize to defend their rights was considered very dangerous by the military. These were women like Soledad, like Valeria, like Monica and Tanya, women who didn't have a high school education, but were leaders of soup kitchens and community church organizations. They were women like Sulema. Sulema didn't have a third-grade education, but she had always dreamed of being a nurse. and she absolutely loved everything she was learning as a community health worker. One day, after a session on mental health and empowerment, she came home to find her husband had once again locked her out of their small wooden home. She told me later that as she stood there in the pouring rain, she thought about everything that we had talked about that day, about God's love for her, about her dignity, and she said, "Karen, I felt a wave of self-worth and I broke down the door." She said, standing up to my husband, years of fear went out the window. So I guess maybe we were a little subversive at times. But Chile has changed over these years, and so have we. Chile has returned to democracy, and along with all of its problems, it is an important step in a process to make change in a more just society. Instead of 4 staff people, we now have 20. We have 2 centers, one in Santiago, the capital, the other in southern Chile in Concepcion. Both places have been visited several times by members of Trinity. And we continue to train local women to be community health promoters, but we train them primarily in issues around violence against women and nutrition. For a project commissioned by the Ministry of Health last year, we were asked to train community health workers and the directors of public clinics throughout the whole country of Chile. This is a far cry from those years ago when people were sitting outside watching us, waiting to see what we would do. And because we've been around for a long time and have a very skilled staff, we've also been able to change the national laws. We changed the national tobacco laws, and now we're working to get a tax on soft drinks. Our reach has extended beyond Chile in these 35 years through our international training program every January. 150 participants have come from over 19 countries to learn about our training methodologies. Today, we're providing technical assistance to the Hope Foundation for African Women in Kenya that's using our training model to train community health workers in rural villages in Kenya. The benefits of being here for 35 years have borne fruits we never could have imagined when we began. Time has been such an important factor. It takes time to really get to know people and a community and their problems. And by staying for the long haul, EPES has invested in 3 generations of local leaders and 3 generations of community health teams who are today reaching thousands and thousands of people through their work, addressing issues like the growing obesity epidemic among young people because of fast foods, addressing issues around tobacco use, violence against women, early detection of breast cancer, and disability and inclusion. Another quick example of long-term impact is the first generation of health promoters, children, always tell us how different their lives are because of their mother's participation. Many of them now have finished high school and some have gone on to college, and they're working as psychologists, social workers, and teachers in their communities. Now shift gears with me as I tell you another story from Chile, one that exemplifies what happens when there isn't long-term commitment. On August 5th, 2010, maybe you remember when a gold and copper mine collapsed in northern Chile. Do you remember that? 33 men were trapped under a rock the size of the Empire State Building. I still find that impossible to imagine, being under a rock, some of the hardest rock in the world, and it was as big as the Empire State Building. Experts at the time estimated that their chance of survival was less than 1%. The rescue operation was an extraordinary event, entailing leadership under enormous time pressure and involving teamwork by hundreds of people from all over the world. Perhaps most impressive in the overall organization was the miners themselves. They organized themselves into shifts every day, they had daily prayer services, and they had to ration their small amount of food over such a long period of time. After more than 2 months underground, at the depth of 2,300 feet, the miners emerged, fragile but alive. Do you remember that when they were lifted in that NASA capsule, one by one coming up to Earth? And the last man was lifted, they held up a huge sign that said, "Misión cumplida Chile," mission accomplished Chile. It was an image seen by more than 1 billion TV viewers. Now, were some of you watching that on television as they were lifted up? Do you remember this? It was a unifying, emotional, and hopeful event that does remind us of what is possible when people come together to work for a common objective. But unfortunately, as the media circus died down, so did any interest in actually helping these men that had been hailed as heroes. Today, these miners, have trouble making ends meet. Almost all of them live in poverty. Some are back working in mines. Some can't get jobs because they're considered bad luck. Many have succumbed to alcoholism and addiction. Many are on antidepressants and suffer nightmares and flashbacks. One miner said in an interview last year, "I personally feel like we were completely manipulated. The government used us and they threw us away as if we were disposable coffee cups." The mining company itself was completely negligent. It was very profitable and yet didn't even have stairs for an emergency. One of the miners had made a formal complaint just a week before the accident. Months later, the mining company was acquitted of all responsibility in the court case that had been brought against them. This enraged the miners and their families and so many people throughout Chile. One of the leaders, who was portrayed by Antonio Banderas in the Hollywood movie about the miners, said, "I wish we had never been rescued." So how does the miners' story relate to global mission? I think it points to the importance of adopting long-term strategies that are not just looking for immediate outcomes. Many times, good people and governments come together at a moment of crisis, but quickly forget the people once the spotlight shifts. Maybe you know 1 million ways this has happened in your own community. But what does it say about us as a people that 1 billion people celebrated the rescue of the miners, but their post-rescue day-to-day lives seem to matter so little? And while we clearly have the technical skill and resources to make spectacular things happen, we must also be committed to asking questions about what makes people and communities vulnerable in the first place, and how can we address these underlying issues of poverty, injustice, and profound inequality. Recognizing the brokenness of our world, Christ calls the church to share in his ministry of healing and wholeness. "I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." The church's mission in health, its commitment not merely to survival, but to life in abundance, challenges all of us to work towards new, more just and humane social structures. Jesus spoke frequently about poverty and justice, over 290 times in the New Testament. In Jesus, we see the heart of what a life full of God is like: kindness, compassion, and justice. Jesus' life and message continues to remind us of what God asks of us in Micah 6:8. And he inspired his disciples to be in it for the long haul. The path of discipleship is not an individual path, but involves being together in community that remembers and celebrates the risen, living Christ and seeks to do justice, to love kindness, and walk humbly with God. I've recently been reading a book called Toxic Charity by Robert Lupton, and he says that while mercy is a force that compels us to acts of compassion, in time, mercy will collide with an ominous force, that of injustice. And perhaps, he says, that's why the Bible emphasizes both mercy and justice. Mercy combined with justice is what leads to holistic involvement, to, yes, responding to immediate care, but to having a long-term commitment and future plans for long-term involvement. Not all of us are called to travel across the world, but we are all called to act justly in each of our lives. For EPES, these many years of accompaniment with poor communities have taught us that there are no easy answers to complex problems, and that achieving good health for all is always about human rights and justice. As we look back over these years working together, our staff is filled with deep emotion and gratitude for the many congregations like Trinity that have accompanied us on this journey. The partnership and support of many congregations like yours with the global mission of the ELCA makes our work possible. I'd like to end with a final story. In the mid-1980s, I was taking a few health promoters home after a going-away party from one of our staff members. Gaston, the staff member, was going to Concepcion, just 6 hours south, to lead our team there. But in the midst of the brutal military dictatorship, the health team was feeling this was just one more sign of abandonment and isolation. So they felt very sad about his leaving, despite our commitment that EPES was continuing to work in their community. Senora Isabel was the last person I dropped off that day. Senora Isabel is an older woman whose tired eyes and worn hands reveal years of suffering and hardship. She's worked a lifetime in the open market selling fruits and vegetables. She would often work all day and then cross the large, dusty urban shantytown on foot to arrive at the health class and then promptly fall asleep. As we arrived at her home that day after the going-away party, she reached across the seat and grabbed my hand and said, "Karen, ¿cuándo te vas?" Karen, when are you leaving? So I thought maybe she was confused that this was a party for me, not for Gaston. I said, No, Isabel, I'm not leaving. Gaston is leaving. I'm staying. So without smiling, but with gentle kindness, she squeezed my hand and said, "Karen, ¿cuándo te vas?" Karen, when are you leaving? So now I started to feel a little uncomfortable and started to make jokes. No, I'm going to be here for a long time. In fact, you're going to have to kick me out of here. Without smiling, but with gentle kindness, she said, "No, you will leave, Gaston is leaving, and EPES will eventually leave, because everything good in the life of the poor always ends. Everything good in the life of the poor always ends." Global mission for us means making a long-term commitment to the Senora Isabels and Suleimas of this world that know we won't leave and that their right to live lives filled with dignity and love and justice keep our work going. Today, these same women are the ones training other community health promoters. I thank you for walking with us in this journey, for helping deepen our bonds of kinship, and for caring about the lives of the poor in Chile in the spirit of the words of the prophet Micah and Jesus. Today, we're aware that the relationship between the North and the South, between churches in the North and the South, is not one of giver and receiver, but one of equal companions walking together. A term that emerged from Latin America expresses this new model of mission as one of accompaniment, of walking together in a common cause of justice and healing for our world. And after 35 years, EPES still looks to the future as communities and challenges change over time. There is still so much to do, and my dad would be so happy because I still wake up every morning so happy to go to work. We hope Trinity continues to walk with us on the long haul of justice for the poor, and we're thrilled and grateful that a team from Trinity and Christ the King in Mankato will be coming to visit us this November. I wish you the best in your lives and work. Que Dios le bendiga. God bless you. Thank you.